Hi, Zizaran here with another Ultimatum League starter for 3.14, and this is going to be Summon Raging Spirits with a minion instability. That means they're exploding bees. This build saw a little bit of an increase because low life is now counted at 50% instead of 33%, and that means that they actually detonate a lot faster, which is really good for our build. It's a very straightforward build to play, and something I've done quite a lot before. Even in the Blight race, this is what I started with, and I was the first person in the race to kill Shaper, and got really far, almost being the first level 100 character. It's really easy to respec with like Spectres if you want just a very specific clear speed build, but Summon Raging Spirits lends itself to be a really good boss killer, so it's a great build, can be very tanky, and have a large amount of damage and scales really well. It's also really easy to play. Pretty much all you have to do is right click and then drop a Orb of Storm that also curses the boss whenever you are killing something that has a large amount of HP. So let's take a look at the skill tree. We're using the Path of Building Community Forecast normal, so make sure that you have that version. The skill tree is like normal, where we show everything point for point and how to level. And then we have a couple of like endgame trees that are slightly different with and without clusters. And honestly, this build gets a large damage benefit by getting the cluster jewels. A few different things to talk about as well. Early on, it's very easy to level with Infernal Legion. You'll instantly notice that it starts burning everything, and honestly, I really like rushing right after minion instability, and you get it like around level 8 or 10, I can't exactly remember, but as soon as you have minion instability, and the Infernal Legion brings the Summon Raging Spirits down to 50% now, they're going to explode and do a large amount of damage. It's also very easy to pick up Elemental Equilibrium early, and then when you're doing Orb of Storms on an enemy, then you'll see that they will get a large amount of damage. So quickly, let's explain what Elemental Equilibrium does and how it works. So it's enemies you hit with elemental damage temporarily get plus 25 resist to those elements and minus 50 to the others. Well, we're never really hitting an enemy, right? Because Summon Raging Spirit doesn't count as us. So what we're doing is we're using Orb of Storms, and we're extremely careful that we don't have added fire damage to spells anywhere, because we strictly want our Orb of Storms, whenever we hover over it and look what kind of damage it's doing, we only want it to do lightning, and cold damage is okay too. But you never want your Orb of Storms to do any type of fire damage. And when you are then putting Orb of Storms on an enemy, that enemy gets minus 50 fire resistance, and that's what we want. So as normal, like you can see that we have like the socket groups and everything like here showing you how to level, and it's pretty easy. The auras are a little bit optional. You could, instead of doing Generosity Anger, and be careful to, at least if you are going to use Anger, you do want to use Generosity. But you could also do like a combination of Flesh and Stone, Skitterbots, and then play around with levels on Vitality and Clarity. But you always want to make sure that your mana feels comfortable, and using an Enduring Mana Flask feels really good early. Here we also have endgame links, and we have a couple of options, and I want to discuss and talk a little bit about the different things. So with Summon Raging Spirits, there's some really strong helmets that we'll show you in a sec, and then we can basically just have Summon Raging Spirits, which is our main gem, for linked in the helmet, and then we get a few additional effects from the helmet, as you can see here. The other one, you can also directly 6-link your Summon Raging Spirits. This is like an okay option early on before we get like, you know, the option to get combs, and maybe you don't want to bother with Spectres. And the third option is to do Spectres and Zombies in a 6-link, and then we're still doing the Summon Raging Spirits in the helmet. But what this Spectre Zombie option would do is you get Feeding Frenzy, you get Elemental Army for fire exposure, and they're able to do Combustion. So this is like a really cool way of doing it as well. For Spectres, you're most likely going to do either a Crush Claw or a Stone Skin Flare, which comes from deep in the Delve, basically the areas that spawn Owl. But one of those should be really good just because they're really tanky, and when they do, or if they do ever die, they're going to hit for like 2 or 3 million damage. And there's two different setups here. You're not using both of these at the same time. The top one is basically once you've unveiled a trigger weapon. This is from level 6 map and higher with Betrayal, and it can be unveiled from any weapon. And once you have that, you want to have high level Bone Offering, high level Desecrate, and a low level Tempest Shield. It just doesn't do anything when we have it high level, so there's no point. But until then, you want to do Cast when Damage Taken, Desecrate, and Bone Offering. This gives us a large amount of defense. And then for utility skills, we have Orb of Storms, Flammability, and Hex Touch, which would drop on bosses for a large amount more damage. And you can put Bone Armor on mouse button 1. This means that the character is basically going to be auto-casting it whenever you're just playing the game, and you don't really have to worry about it. It's a great usage of this. Let's look a little bit at the items. Here in the early game, all you want early is cast speed and plus fire spell skill gems. And that means that if you are able to get anything with plus gem levels, like for example a tabula with +2 duration, that is very big for this early on. And that also means that we get a very large power spike from our Cruel Lab Ascendancy of a natural strength, because gem level is pretty much everything for this build, and it's really good. And that also means that we have a big upgrade waiting for us at the end game if you are able to get a convoking one with +2 gem levels, which looks like this. Everything else in the early game is very straightforward, and the build should be pretty good right then. One of the earliest things that you really want to get on this build, and honestly makes a very large difference, is a Tavukai. Tavukai is like absolutely large. It's way bigger than even getting a +2 gem level amulet, because this has up to a crazy amount of increased damage. It also has a crazy amount of increased life, which is again just more damage for us. And another thing that it lets us do, we want to have as low chaos rest as possible, ideally -17, and you can get even more negative chaos rest by doing prismatic catalysts. For even more damage, however, as well, you can use fertile catalyst on this, and that'll infect some of the like summon raging spirits with life stats, but that obviously 20 fertile catalyst is pretty expensive. So the way you drop a Tavukai is by interacting with the Legion mechanic, and it specifically drops from Karui items. So if you are doing, for example, Legion emblems, then you would want to focus on the Karui side. Especially in Trade League, they shouldn't be too expensive and should be fairly obtainable, and it makes a very large difference in the build. And once you have a Tavukai, especially one with a large amount of negative chaos rest, you're able to drop Infernal Legion and get another gem instead. So early on, you want to use Infernal Legion instead of Minion Life. But then once you have the Tavukai, especially now that it's at 50%, should be very easy to drop Infernal Legion. So at the end game, we do have those like two different options here. We can go with a Comb's Heart, because obviously we're doing our Summon Rating Spirits in our helmet. Or we can go with a really nice Val Regalia. This can give you Offering Effect. You can use an Awakening Orb and then get even more tank by doing Endurance Charge if you've been hit recently. And obviously we can craft even more Hybrid by getting the Life as extra energy shield. And this works really, really good by the fact that we're going to be using a Glorious Vanity of Doriani, giving even more Life as energy shield. And that makes a really, really endgame shield like this incredibly strong. Here we're getting energy shield and life when we block, and we have a large amount of both. So a very, very tanky build, and should be pretty hard to die. Also gives you a large amount of sustain. And for the helmet, we have a lot of options. In the mid game, just getting a helmet with plus minion gems is going to be very, very big. And that also means that you're not necessarily instantly forced into trying to find a 5 or a 6 thing. As soon as you can find an Elder helmet, trying to get a +2 Elder helmet with something like concentrated effect or minion damage is very, very big. And we have like a few examples of a super endgame helmet here. This would be close to perfect with +3 socketed minion gems, 20 conk effect, and level 20 minion damage. You can go even one step further, and we can get a bone helmet with +3 socketed minion gems, and it's the same as the other one, but this is crafted with a horror essence. And the horror essence basically does 30% more damage of socketed elemental gems. The way to get the other things afterwards, the conk effect and minion damage, is that you want to use the Harvest Craft, which is from tier 4 Blue Beasts, non-influence to influence. And obviously this still works on influenced items, so it's really, really good. Now, do remember, getting an insanely endgame helmet like this could be anywhere from like 20 to 50 exalts, but it is nice to have something to aim for if you really want to sink into the build. For the belt, I really like Replica Siegebreaker, but you don't necessarily need to use one. A normal Siegebreaker is quite okay as well for some early damage. If you've never used a Legion Jewel before, let me do a quick explanation of how they work. The only thing that we're looking for here is basically a Glorious Vanity in the name of Doriani. What the number does, which is like basically each one has a random number, that'll change like whatever these would be affected by. But we don't really care what all the small nodes change to. The only thing we're doing here is that we're changing this into Corrupted Soul. And since it's Doriani, that means that every keystone would be changed into Corrupted Soul no matter where you put it. I think to note about the cluster jewels as well, Call to the Slaughter isn't really that important. It's just pretty nice to give your SRS a large amount of movement speed so they get to things faster while clearing. Something the build can be pretty bad at is actually like mechanics like Legion. I feel like whenever you have to like break them out of stasis, the AI just doesn't really deal well with that. And that's one of the downsides of the build. But things like Blight and bosses and clearing in general has felt really, really good, and it's a build I've played quite a lot on stream. Let's go over the checklist of things we want to solve for every build. Are there too many gems to equip? Especially if you are okay with dropping Smoke Mine, it's a very, very easy gem build. Obviously, we have the choice between Comb's Heart or something like a Val Regalia, or anything really with the offering effect. It's okay as like a 6-link chest if you do want to go with the zombie and spectre setup. Can the player have mana issues? It's definitely going to be a bit of a balancing act. Playing around with the level of your clarity. Obviously, Flesh and Stone has an increased mana restoration now. Enduring Mana Flask is definitely the way to go early, especially if you are struggling. However, on most of these, I've been able to drop a Mana Flask entirely. And that's even without doing something like mana cost of skills have a reduced cost with the Elrion ring thing. I haven't found the need to use that. Instead, I usually have something like a boot enchant with 70% of mana regen if you cast a spell recently. And generally, I found it pretty easy to just solve all my mana problems with a little bit of clarity level and then a little bit of percentage mana regen. As far as useful leveling unique goes, honestly, plus gem levels is so insane for this. Especially if you're able to ascend early and grab your unnatural strength, it's absolutely huge. And getting plus fire gem levels is large as well. If you're able to get an early Tavukai, that is insane. So this does make for a really, really good second or third build, but I would still recommend it as a league starter because it is incredibly powerful. As far as like sustain and defenses goes, we obviously have a large amount of block, and life on block is also doable for this build. A bit of a downside though is we don't have a large amount of regen, and I really do want to try to fit vitality. That's why restoration is like kind of tricky on this build, and you do want to play around with it. As far as special mechanics for this build, there are a few things you could fuck up. At any point, whenever you're using Orb of Storms, which is integral to the build, and you really do want to use it to get damage, something that's easy to fuck up is hovering over your Orb of Storms and noticing, wow, I actually have fire damage on it. That would be really bad because you're effectively buffing your enemy's fire resist instead of reducing it by 50. As far as mechanical drawbacks on a build like this, it's a little bit clunky on things like Legion, and honestly, yeah, I don't love doing the Legion mechanic on this, but it's really good for everything else. It's a build I've played a lot, and it has been so much fun to play. And honestly, I love that there's actually a bee microtransaction. It's just something fun about like literally having burning bees that are exploding in your enemy's face. As far as financial hurdles for this build, getting a really beefy helmet is definitely going to be the main one. It would be pretty good just to have like any helmet, and we should have a large amount of damage per single like Summon Raging Spirit's Explosion, but if you're able to get a really, really beefy one, you might be able to get as much as 1 million damage per explosion. Tavukai as well is actually fairly common, but if the build is very popular, relying on a unique could cause it to spark up in price, so that's something to be careful of. Other than that, it should be pretty easy, and it's not too bad to farm your own by doing a lot of Legion emblems. So I hope you guys have a lot of fun in Ultimatum, and I hope this guide helps you out a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching, thanks for subscribing, and remember I'm streaming live on Twitch every day, so if you have any questions, drop by. But more importantly, try to die less than I do.